Welcome to Real Talk in ELT, a podcast that talks about the reality of teaching English.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Real Talk in ELT. I'm here by myself today, yet again. And today I'm going to dive into this question that's been rattling around in my mind a little bit. And it's talking about the expectations that us as teachers and trainers and things like that, what we have as expectations of from course books and printed materials. I'll give you the reason that this started jumping up into my brain, and it's not only specifically because of this scenario, but this was just one of the latest things that kind of happened. Well, actually two. So the first one was a few weeks ago. I gave a talk for EduFest. I was able to, it was quite awesome to do so. To give a webinar about a webinar that I have given before, or a talk that I have given before about leveraging some self-efficacy influencers to improve learner autonomy, but then also to utilize podcasts in a specific way. So I created this little framework that tried to optimize as many self-efficacy influencers as possible when using podcasts in your classrooms. Anyways, I digress. At the end of it, there was a question and answer section, the usual webinar, online webinar, okay? And then I had shared my contact information for people who wanted to get in touch with me to get more information from my slides, right? So I had shared kind of like a resource PDF, I guess you can say. And in that PDF, I had the list of, several, I'm going to say maybe close to 100 possibly, podcasts that people could check out, things that I've used in the past, things that my students have found to be interesting, things that just general podcasts that you could find. So it's just a list of podcasts that you might want to start with. And so most of the people that had sent me an email said, thank you so much. And then I sent them the materials. All was good. And there was this one teacher that responded back to me, and really there was no malice or bad intentions. And I don't ever want to vilify teachers. It was just what she had done had prompted this line of thinking, I guess you could say, in my head again. So she responded back to me after I had sent the PDF with all the resources. Thank you so much. I was hoping to get, and could you please send me, if you have it, a list, the same podcast list that I had sent her, but the podcast list with hyperlinks. Like she wanted the links for everything. And she said it would make her life a lot easier. And I said, well, yeah, it would make your life a lot easier. And then I thought to myself, I said, well, maybe I should do that. But then I was like, well, I don't even know how I would even begin to do that, because I'm a Spotify girl myself. I'm either on Spotify or YouTube. That's the two platforms that I host my podcast on. And then on top of that, depending on whether I'm just listening or if I want to visually see somebody, Spotify does have some video, but not all podcast creators put the video content on there. So then if I really want to see something and there is a video available, then I would go to YouTube. And sometimes things are not available on Spotify, so then I'll find them on Amazon or Google or whatever, iHeartRadio, those types of things. But most podcasts kind of go through all of. Anyways, so I thought, the email kind of, I don't know if I was in what frame of mind I was in, but it kind of took me for a loop. And I was like, well, so I responded and I said, well, I don't think I can really give you a list of hyperlinks, because it really depends on where people listen to their podcasts. I'm here in Brazil and I use Spotify and YouTube, which I think are two of the biggest to find this type of content. But that doesn't mean to say anything, because this particular woman, I believe I would have to check, was from Europe, and I'm not sure what platforms are popular there, if they are the same or if they're not. So I responded. I said, I don't have that. I think it really depends on where you and your clients are going to be listening to the podcast. So you can search for the names and then it'll pop up, or you could go to your preferred platform and then search the name and it should pop up. If it doesn't, then you might have to Google it. So then I started thinking to myself, that's interesting. But really what made it interesting was her comment was that would make it easier for me. Agreed. It would make it easier. No judgment there. And then I was in a webinar a few weeks ago, another like a CPD thing for me. And it was the Conversations of BELF. I'd done a summaries and side notes episode on it with Professor Kurt Kahn. And so he had gone through this whole elaborate thing about changing perspectives. I mean, it was really, well thought out and well researched. And he was trying to, change the kind of the perspective of how we approach our teaching, et cetera, et cetera. He was talking about within an ELF context, or specifically BELF context, because it was Conversations of BELF. And gave a lot of suggestions on how to do these things. And one of the teachers at the end, this is always, this is what happens. Again, I'm not vilifying, but this is what happens at the end of every webinar that I've been, or continuous professional development. Someone popped in the questions box and said, is there any printed material, or is there any course book, I think is how it was phrased, is there any course book that already uses this perspective, this theory, it put into place? And he, the professor sat there and thought about it for a second. He says, no, nothing that comes to mind, nothing that's out there, because he's going based off of some relatively newer research and things like that, and it's not so widespread, these ideas and implementation of them. And so, okay, so he thought about it and said, no, there's nothing currently in the market that he could think of that would really kind of encompass this perspective that he was trying to present. So, and again, I've just seen this kind of on repeat, where people are asking for ready resources. I get it. I understand, because that would be the easiest way to see for yourself if you, the way that things are being implemented. And this would be the easiest way to see for yourself how excuse me, like courses would be structured in a particular way, and materials, and how activities would be developed and stuff like that. So I understand the reason behind it. But then I also think to myself, well, some of these things that we're talking about are relatively new. And for printed materials to be put into place, at least from the conversations that I've had with, some of the people that work in materials writing, that's a relatively extensive process. It's not like something new comes out, some sort of research comes out, and then within the year, or within a year and a half or 2 years, the printed material comes out based on that research. That's not really what happens in the industry. So I was thinking about this, and then I was thinking about the teachers that I train and that I have mentorships with and things like that, because they also ask for these things. Again, to no fault of their own, they're just looking for the path of least resistance. If there's something that exists in the market that aligns with their belief system, then that's great. But I also think that we have to start being reflective of a couple things. If you're listening to something, webinar, podcast, reading a research paper, looking at new studies in the area or something like that, we tend to get very excited about them. Say, this is great, I'm going to implement this, which I think everybody should do some action research, implement things that they're studying or researching, and see how it goes. But I think teachers need to take a little responsibility, because there's one thing that happens that I've seen happen. I'm hedging a lot here because I don't want this to sound critical, because I include myself in this group. and I'm constantly thinking about this about myself, is that we need to better hone our skills in looking critically at printed materials. And I think that we need to start having a set of questions for ourselves. Because if we take clients in, for example, if we take a student, we go through the needs analysis process. And then from the needs analysis process, we have our priorities and we set up, the curriculum or the syllabus that you're going to be using with that student and develop the lessons and move forward. And I think that when people use course books, we tend to say, okay, well, this new student came in and they're B1, so I'm just going to stick them in the B1 course book, which is fine. If that's the type of course that you're running, I'm not opposed to that necessarily. Course books work. They've been working for, decades, and they are developed by people, materials writers who are typically have classroom experience and who are very well versed in being able to develop materials that suit the needs of international students. And so I think that's fine. But at the same time, course books don't serve all purposes. And I think that we're starting to realize that that's starting to become very prevalent. We say, okay, well, course books don't serve all purposes. And sometimes we need to adapt them and be flexible. And sometimes we need to substitute materials because they don't really attend to the students' needs as we would like to attend to their needs, which is fine. But then I would say, just as we're assessing our students' level, we should probably be assessing our level in our abilities to be able to actually substitute things, to actually develop materials, and to critically look at printed materials and say, well, these sections and the majority of this book suits a purpose, or the majority of this book doesn't suit a purpose, and I'm going to have to create a bespoke and material course, whatever. So I think that, we have to look at our abilities in being able to do that. From what I've seen, just in the years that I've been training teachers, is that we're not great at judiciously substituting materials. We're hypercritical of the materials that we receive from publishing houses. We're hypercritical of materials writers, the people that dedicate, a good portion of their time and life into creating these types of materials. And we're very dismissive of them quickly. But then, and this is just from my experience of observing and training and seeing what, people are doing with their own materials, we're not all materials designers. And so I think that we have to be careful in deciding what materials we're going to include. We have to be have better skills in knowing how to critically analyze pre-made materials. And we have to be very realistic on our own abilities to develop things. So I've been teaching for a few years now, and I'm confident in my ability to follow frameworks and things along those lines, but I don't get too overly creative, because I really believe in kind of tried and true methods, and if it's based in science, or if it's based in how can I say this? If it's reflective of success in long-term studies, then I'm okay with implementing, certain types of frameworks. But I think that, newer things that come out, I would be hesitant to develop whole courses based on one single idea. So that's okay. So that's one part. I went off into the rabbit hole there, but judiciously looking at and critically looking at materials and also analyzing my own, and I could say our own as teachers, our own abilities to develop things to be able to substitute in not just for entertainment purposes, for actual purposes of learning, meaning they're aligned with the needs analysis. It's one of the priorities of the course. It's specifically catered to either a group or an individual to work on something that they truly need in their language development. So I think that that's one thing that we have to start really looking at. And I'm not saying that I'm great at it. I'm just saying, I kind of started thinking about, can I actually do this? And okay. And then, in that same vein, I guess we could say, I think that when we're starting to look at course books because we're hypercritical of them and we say, oh, this course book is bad and I don't like these activities and things like that. What are you actually using the course book for? I mean, why did you go directly to a course book as opposed to making your own materials, as opposed if you have the capabilities of doing that and you're confident that you're going to be able to meet your students' needs, or why are you going to maybe not a course book but pre-made materials online and saying, okay, this is fine. Well, it's fine. Why? Does it actually serve a purpose, or is it something that you just say, well, it's the easiest way around doing this, copy and paste and use that? I'm not really sure that we're asking, ourselves before we say, well, I'm going to go with the path of least resistance. Listen, I also get it. I'm a teacher. I don't have a lot of time, so I don't want to spend hours and hours creating and developing all new materials, especially if I'm not super confident that I can do that in a really effective way. But what are we using the course book for, I think, is a question that we should start asking ourselves. And how are we actually giving our students real opportunities to interact with speakers or speaker learners, however you want to phrase it, speakers of the language? Because I think that also we can't only have this classroom environment. So then if we decide to implement a course book, and the course book has people with lots of different accents. Okay. Sometimes they're just actors that are putting on an accent, but okay, that's fine. But it's still relatively contrived, depending on the course book. Sometimes there's authentic materials in there. But then, I mean, is just having different accents enough? Because that's not interaction. That's just different accents. They're just they're having exposure to different, accents, which is good, of course, for their listening skills and pronunciation skills and all of that, and being able to identify, but they're not interacting. And so if we're picking a course book and saying, yep, good enough, is it? I don't know. I have no answers here. I have lots of questions, but I have no answers. So then I thought to myself, well, how am I creating environments where people can actually interact with other speakers of English? I mean, they interact with me, but I'm their teacher. And I don't think that that's necessarily very genuine. After being a teacher for so long, I'm just such a teacher now. I try to be human, but I'm just like it's so ingrained in me to just be like the teacher. So then I thought to myself, well, okay, I could have them interact with each other, but would they be willing to do that? And if they're not willing to do that, how can I get them to actually interact? Because that's the whole purpose, is for them to learn a language and then communicate. And so if I'm going to be hypercritical and say, well, the course book doesn't serve that purpose, then I have to build my skill in being able to organize that for the benefit of my students, right? So, okay, so then that's another question. And then I started thinking to myself, well, Okay, so we can probably use course books as a platform. I would say that that would probably be the best thing, that we can use them as a platform, but then also raise their awareness that, okay, so here's the foundational things, here's what's widely accepted. And I hesitate to use the term, but here's what the standard English is of that. Okay, because I do believe that they have to have some sort of foundation to base things off of. And if we're going to choose a foundation, then we have to choose standard English, whether it's received pronunciation or general American, or, it looks very academic, I guess, okay, well, here's the rules and you have to follow the rules. But I think that there has to be some sort of standardization, just at least to give them the foundation, so that then they can be creative with it and kind of make the language their own. So there should be a foundational studies, great. So then we could use course books to do that. But then I've also seen colleagues that choose to use only authentic materials in their classrooms. And I thought to myself, well, okay, because there is a way to do that, right? If you use the authentic materials, then you can introduce these standardized forms and lexical items and discourse features and et cetera, while practicing their skills. So we could do that. But then if you use authentic materials, there is also exposure to the real way, quote unquote, the real way language is being used. But that would be a lot of work for the teacher, right? So then we go back to the thing, well, I want something that's printed and ready and done, but printed and ready and done doesn't necessarily reflect what's happening in the real world. So we're not meeting all of the students' needs. But at the same time, if we use something that's only from the real world, it's going to create a lot of necessity and a lot of work for the teacher, because we're going to have to build the units of kind of the standardization. Like here's the foundational, and here's how it's been manipulated, and people can creatively use the language to express their opinions. So I would say that there's a lot to think about, and there's a lot of skills for as teachers. And I'm not talking language skills, I'm talking teaching skills, pedagogical skills, in choosing materials, in choosing the balance of materials that you want to have in your classroom, whether or not you're going to introduce authentic situations, which I think is important, but then how are you going to introduce authentic situations? Are your students willing to become a part of these authentic situations? And where can you do that? There's Tacola is a project that has authentic interactions between speaker learners, for example. But then I think that right now, teachers need to take responsibility. And I know that we already have so much responsibility. So, and this sounds very hypocritical, like, oh, I'm just going to sit here and in my little office and podcast to you and say, you need to take responsibility. No, but I'm including myself in this scenario, that we need to take responsibility and say, okay, beyond the demands that we put on major publishers to create good materials, beyond the demands that we put on services and maybe the free services or paid services where we get materials that are created and developed for us to help facilitate our life, because that also is a necessity. Beyond that, I think that we need to take responsibility of how are my skills in being able to critically look at materials and see which ones are best fitted for my students, but then also how can I develop things that are going to be effective in the classroom, not entertaining, not fun. Those components of entertainment and fun may come up, but that's not the main objective. We're teachers, okay? So if your things are beautiful or if they are not beautiful, I don't really care. I'm concerned about the effectiveness of lessons. So how can we create effective alternatives or adaptations to printed materials or things that we want to use in the classroom. And if we go 100% away from course books, because people are starting to think of this ChatGPT and artificial intelligence and all of these technological tools that are going to help us create and create new, very focused, singular focused and adapted and highly personalized materials. My question for you is, that's great. So we can go 100% course books or 100% authentic, or we can use a mix of those two, or we can also use technology to help us out for customization purposes. But how are our skills as teachers in looking at the effectiveness of things that we develop, looking at the effectiveness of things that we adapt to suit students' needs? And I think we kind of overlook this. Just because we have really great content or material, that doesn't mean that you're delivering a really good lesson or an effective lesson. I'm not going to use good. I'm going to use the word effective. Did your student walk away from the lesson with something, linguistically speaking, whether it be new grammar, new lexis, awareness of discourse features, improved phonology and pronunciation practices? Were they able to develop one of their skills or sub-skills? And I think that when we start making it as simple as, oh, send me the materials, or oh, it's already ready to go, I just have to teach. Yeah, but you have to teach and you have to look at the material. You can have the best material in the world, comprehensive lesson plan, great material, but if you don't know how to actually implement that in a classroom, you're going to have a problem. If you can't effectively develop your teaching practice, then you're going to have a problem. And I think that some of the things that are going on now is that, well, we just want something fast and easy. And I think that's akin to wanting fast and easy food. If you're fast and easy, I don't think you're going to be effective. So it was just something that I started thinking about, because I've been seeing this trend of, oh, can you send me this? Oh, can you send me that? I want this material. I have this material. I can create this material with AI. And okay, you can, but are you any good at it? Not necessarily are you any good at it. Are you effective at doing that? And how are your students benefiting? Because if your students aren't benefiting, then really, what's the point? I don't know if this is helpful for anyone, but this was just kind of a thing that was rolling around in my head. Are we using materials properly? If we have such high demands of materials, shouldn't we have the same high demands of ourselves in being able to develop adaptations or substitutions for the materials? And what type of skills should we be fostering in ourselves? And how can we systematize that so that we can have constant progress in it? So those are my thoughts on expectations of course books, expectations of materials, expectations of things that come to us, and how we're reacting to it and how we're analyzing it and how we're making sure that it actually is appropriate for our learners. And are we actually developing skills that we are challenging learners, and we're creating environments for them to learn and to kind of take control of their own language and use it effectively. So things to think about, maybe. That's it for this episode. I just have a lot of questions, but it was something that I started reflecting on. And if anybody has any answers for me, I'm always open for suggestions. But perhaps we should start thinking about putting as much making the expectations for ourselves as high as we do for publishers and content creators and materials developers, and trying to build our own skill set so that we're not so dependent upon those people to give us what they think would work in our classroom, and therefore we would have our own ability to create things that we find to be most effective in our classrooms with our students, because we're teaching individuals at the end of the day. And so, yeah, things to think about. That's it for today. Thank you for listening to my ramblings. Hopefully, maybe you have a suggestion for me, or perhaps you have some information or reflection. I would love to hear from you. So feel free to comment or send me a message. As always, take care and see you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk and ELT. Want to join the conversation? Head on over to Instagram at Kelly Pennington ELT and send me a message. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube or Spotify channel to stay up to date. And of course, take care of yourself, your health, your vibe, and your tribe. Until next time.